I've been smoking for a long time. I find that after a tough day in junior high, a cigarette relaxes me. You look like you knew what you were doing all right. It's really easy. Hey, I could teach you. No way. No, I'm not interested. Suit yourself. But while I'm off having a great time with the guys, you'll be here all alone, a lost, pathetic soul. Well, okay, let's hit Tobacco Road.
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I'm going to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And Amy, what is the trope we're talking about today?
Sorry, Jay. You're going to have to answer your own question. I'm having a bit of a hard time.
We're talking about cigarette smoking and what happens when you get caught smoking ciggies. This is a classic sitcom thing. This is sitcom as public service announcement, first and foremost, right? I think this is especially for our generation, even though the shows we're going to cover span decades from the 50s to
they
this
were
year.
already telling people smoking was going to kill you back in the 50s. People just kept doing it.
But nonetheless, I feel like our generation was really kind of hit the hardest with this. The 80s and the 90s, the anti-drug, anti-cigarettes, because we were at that point with the cigarettes especially where any controversy about how bad they were had been completely eliminated and people were still doing it. And so they had to resort to the sitcoms, you know, trying to tell people what's what. So what is our lineup? What did we watch?
All right. We are watching Leave It to Beaver, Season 2, Episode 9, The Pipe. Diff'rent Strokes, Season 6, Episode 12, Where There's Smoke. King of the Hill, Season 1, Episode 10, Keeping Up with Our Joneses. And Abbott Elementary, Season 3, Episode 4, Smoking.
Yeah, so I've got some confessionals to dish out here as we start talking about our own experience with this trope. But I'll ask you first, were you ever caught smoking? Did you ever experience the shame of your parent finding the cigarettes in your pocket or anything like that?
Are you ready for this story? I don't know if I've even told you this story. All right, so I had Saturday smoker school because I got caught smoking on campus by the AP or whatever.
What age is this?
This is in high school. And so smoker school was on Saturday, but I was a cheerleader at the time and we also had a game on Saturday. So I told my parents, I somehow was able to this was still in that age where they didn't call home for everything. They gave you a paper, you had to take it home. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I got caught smoking on campus. I started kind of flirting with cigarette smoking probably in 7th grade, flirted with it basically until I was about 16 or so. And then once I was driving, we drove around and smoked. Cruising was the name of the game. And so I smoked until I was about 19. I got bronchitis in college and quit. So that's my smoking journey. But so Saturday smoker school and a game that night. Like I said, I was a cheerleader. So I told my parents that I had extra practice, that we were doing a routine at the game, or we had extra practice. I somehow convinced my parents that I had this extra practice. I had to go to school early and not to worry about coming to the game because I wasn't going to be able to go to the game because the smoker school and the game were at the same time. And somehow got away with it. My parents never found out that I had smokers Saturday school. I mean, I've told them in the years since, but...
Yeah, I love the concept of smoker school as a movie or a TV show or something.
And so the first thing that happened in smoker school she wanted us to go around the room, say our name and how many packs a day we smoked. At this point in time, I probably smoked a cigarette in a week. Yeah. Or maybe 3 cigarettes in a week. So And it's going around the room, and every single kid is like, my name's Meredith, and I smoke a pack a day. My name's James, and I smoke a pack a day. 15 kids before me say they smoke a pack or more a day. It gets to me, I'm like, I'm Amy, and I smoke a pack a day.
Yeah, peer pressure, like we're going to see in our episodes. Yeah, that is wild. I did not do anything like cigarette smoking as a child. I was a very straight-laced kid, much to my detriment, I think, because when that dam finally broke, towards the end of high school, when I finally got to college, and I started realizing that all of that, education / brainwashing that I had been exposed to about cigarettes and weed and all that stuff, once that started to sort of collapse in my mind, and I realized that maybe not all of that is totally true. That's something we're going to get in one of our newer episodes, educators struggling with the lack of nuance in our education about this. And so I really kind of fell hard into smoking cigarettes, all kinds of other vices, nothing super crazy. I wasn't doing meth on the street corner or anything, but I definitely got up to no good in college and had a hard time overcoming a lot of those vices throughout my adult life, and in some cases to this day. And my early 20s, the few years after college, when I was still living at home, were particularly shameful. A lot of the things we were seeing in these sitcom episodes that little kids are doing, like trying to smoke inside the house and then spray Pine Sol around the room to cover it up, was the kind of thing that I was doing at like 24, and like smoking in my parents' cars and stuff. Like, I really kind of cringe when I look back on it. And
yeah, I never can understand how my parents didn't know that I smoked. Now, they did ask about things, and I was like, I have friends that smoke. We keep the windows open, whatever. Yeah. And they knew that I dabbled.
The friends that smoke was definitely a thing, because you also have to remember in the 80s and 90s, more people smoked, and so it was just more plausible. But also there was this thing, we as a society, our sense of smell vis-a-vis cigarette smoke was very, very different.
Oh, yeah. There was this great moment in King of the Hill where the smoking section is like this back room, whereas it used to be the whole place.
Yeah, if you walked into a restaurant now and there was one person smoking a cigarette like in the back office or something, you would be like, that's weird. Is someone smoking a cigarette in here? And yeah, back in the day, there were smoking and non-smoking. What is your preference, sir? And the smoking section was dozens of people smoking cigarettes indoors 10 feet away from the rest of us. And so in those days, we didn't have that same, you still smelled it, but it wasn't like now where it's like somebody poured gasoline on you if you go out to smoke a cigarette.
I think about that now. I'm like for hours and hours and hours, we would ride around in cars just smoking cigarettes half the time with the windows half up. You know what I mean?
And that's one of the reasons why I was a light smoker for most of my adult years, but I shamefully didn't stop smoking until I was about 40. And one of the reasons was because finally society has caught up to it. And at least in the circles we roll in as adults, there is now an anti-peer pressure, and you are usually the only person smoking, and you do feel weird, exactly.
I think, and most people that I know that smoked up until about a few, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they moved on to vapes.
Yeah, and
I'm going to say around 10 years ago, people started who were smoking, moved on to vapes, thinking that was the thing that was going to be better for them.
But just to close the loop, my parents, I was an adult through most of that time, but there would be little moments where my parents would get inklings of smoking, and it was a shame like no other, because what I came to sort of realize was smoking cigarettes was really the only true secret that I had from my parents, because there's all kinds of things we might not tell our parents. Oh, hey, I got laid last night, or I just took a big dump or something. There's all sorts of things we choose not to share. But it was the one thing where it's like, I can't justify it. Like my sense of self, or like anything that I could explain to you about why I do this, this, like, I can't. And it haunted me and was ultimately one of the reasons why I stopped. So yeah, this is something that looms heavy in my life. And it's, it's serious business, but of course doesn't stop the sitcoms from having fun with it.
Right. So, well, and you've got that kind of perspective of like, no, this is what it really becomes. And it becomes this like hair shirt, that you're wearing. Whereas I think my experience was a lot like some of our kids, which was just like, I'm curious. And then, I'm in trouble. Mm-hmm. All right. So leave it to Beaver.
Yeah, this is our second or third time covering the Beaver. Always love the spoken credits. That takes me back, when you've got the announcer explaining who everybody is. And yeah, this one, it starts off with Beaver. He's sitting on his dad's like workbench in his little like workshop or whatever. Yep. He looks like a ventriloquist dummy.
Yeah,
I noted.
This is early days, right? Is this
it's season 2?
Season 2. Beaver is really young.
Yeah, he's a little tiny guy. And yeah, it's just funny. He looks like a little Cabbage Patch Kid or something sitting on that bench. But yeah, basically to get into it, the family gets a package in the mail from Fred Rutherford, right?
Yes,
this
so
is
the
a family
Rutherfords
friend.
are their friends that, what we know from this episode, right? The Rutherfords are their friends that travel, and they just happen to be in Frankfurt, Germany. And so they sent them a gift from Frankfurt, Germany.
Yeah, and that gift is a Morsham pipe. Do you know how to pronounce this, or did you look this up?
No, what is it?
Well, I mean, we have the information that the show gives us. It's this very ornate, like it looks like it's made of porcelain or something, and this is black and white
ivory
show. But yes,
something.
this is very
really
much
fancy.
like something your grandparents would have on a shelf. At first glance, it almost looks like a conch or something, like a seashell, but it's little molded pipe with lots of like little figurines and stuff like sculpted into it, but it's a functional pipe. And what we learn, importantly after the kids have scampered off, is that the pipe is designed to change colors as you smoke it.
Right. So Wally and the Beav are there with their dad while their dad's trying to open this crate to find out what the gift is. And then the mom comes in. She's been talking to Larry on the phone. That's Beaver's friend that we're going to meet later on.
Yeah.
And so she's like, sorry, he can't come to the phone. He's out in the garage with his dad. I'll give him the message. So mom goes out there. Now we've got the whole family in the garage, and the dad's holding this very ornate pipe and is like, he knows I don't smoke, but maybe it's a display piece.
Yeah.
And then the kids run off, and Ward says to June, it's meant to turn dark inside. It gets dark when it's, when you use it. And he's like, but I'll never use it, so...
Yeah, he says put it on the shelf, and I'm like, hell yeah, this thing is cool. Like, of course put it on the shelf, obviously. But so then the aforementioned Larry, he comes over. He's going to be, straight out of your sitcom playbook, the bad influence friend, the kid who wants to try things just to try things, right? He says, literally, I wrote down the line, when they're looking at this pipe, he says, hey, Beaver, let's try smoking it, right? It's as simple as that.
Let's try smoking it. And Beav's like, yeah, he's very hesitant. He's like, I'm not supposed to smoke till I'm 21.
Yeah.
I don't even think we have anything around here to smoke in it. I don't even, like all of these things. He's just given reason after reason why they shouldn't. And Larry just keeps pushing forward. He's like, I think you're chicken.
He says, if there's no one here to catch us, then it's all right to do it.
Exactly.
Right? Classic logic. And then this brought me back. Their first experiment is to pack the pipe with coffee and smoke that. And if you remember, this was...
Burnt coffee smells so bad. I can't imagine how they got that stink out of the house.
It's funny. I couldn't tell. I've never tried burning coffee outright. Obviously, brewing coffee smells great.
Starbucks usually smells like.
But there are a lot of people like that.
Starbucks won't ever sponsor us now. But no, they especially overseas, I don't know if there's an issue with the conversion between Fahrenheit to Celsius, but the beans are always burned and the coffee tastes burnt.
Right. Well, fair enough, but there are words, it's not like burning hair or something.
No.
But this took me back to my college filmmaking days when our buddy Jordan from our comic books episode, he was an actor in my movies playing a weed smoker, but he didn't smoke in real life, so we had him take bong hits of tea to be
man,
like
why
our
didn't you
fake,
just get that like fake filler cigarette stuff that like...
We didn't have those. We just threw tea into the bong. And this
God,
reminded
that's gotta
me of
hurt his
that.
throat.
Yeah, and so he, Beaver remembers he's not allowed to have coffee either. That's kind of a funny thing. But so the first round of this, we've got Wally coming back going, Beaver, why does your shirt smell like coffee?
Yeah, and we get the first instance of him walking through the house, of a character walking through the house, spraying the Pine Sol air freshener stuff, piney air fresh or whatever.
But then Larry comes back and he's got his little envelope, right, full of tobacco, which is like loose tobacco from ashtrays.
Yeah,
this
so he was
nauseating
saying, so he was saying that his parents had a party last night, and so he was going around to the ashtrays and picking it up. So I'm assuming this is because people were rolling their own cigarettes, and that's why you'd be able to have access to.
Well, either that
tobacco.
or you just took the butts and it still had a little bit of tobacco left and squeezed it out.
Oh my gosh, what an adventure! Like how long it must have taken him to do that?
Yeah, it reminded me of, I don't think we mentioned it on our podcast, but when the girl in Three's Company got her cooking wine by going around and taking the remnants of the used wine glasses.
Does it have to all be this? I can make one from the other bottles. And
disgusting notion to go around, whether you're discarded wine or tobacco. But yeah, the kid shows up with this little envelope of tobacco and they smoke it, right?
Right. Well, so before he leaves on the coffee day, he says, because Beav says no. He says he's not going to smoke the coffee. And so, Larry's like, well, I think you're just chicken. Would you smoke it if I got real tobacco? And he's like, yeah, I'd try it, I think, if you got real tobacco. So then a few days later, he comes back with real tobacco. And now, the Beav is stuck. He's like, I got to do it. So he says, okay. And then we get these great scenes both times where it's black and white, but they've got like a fog machine on. Yeah, so you can see how smoky the room is.
Super surreal. Just their whole experience of smoking. It reminded me a lot of The Lost Weekend, the Billy Wilder movie about alcoholism that has, that's black and white too. And it has this like kind of over the top music score with the theremin and everything. So it's scored like a horror movie, but it's about this guy with a drinking problem. And all the sort of surreal, they're doing the crazy music and they're doing weird angles with the cameras
as they
and
start to feel yucky.
Yeah, so it has like this kind of Twilight Zone vibe to it. And they feel like how I felt one of my many adventures. That's at a high school graduation party. I smoked like a box of cheap cigars. Oh. And it, horrible feeling. To this day, it's why I don't like cigars. And that's kind of the way that they characterize them being all just like sick to their stomach and everything reminded me of that.
Yeah. And so they, smoked this, and then they both are kind of like, I don't feel so good, and they have like tears under their eyes. Their eyes were watering from the smokiness. And Larry's like, yeah, I think I'm going to go home. And Beav's like, yeah, my stomach doesn't feel like it's going to stay in place. And Larry's like, well, what are you going to do about this mess? And he's like, well, I guess I'm going to clean it. And so then we get this montage of the Beav, like being June Cleaver, going around cleaning everything up.
He aromatizes it again with the Pine Sol. And this was taking me back to those, all the little tricks. Oh, what if we open the window? Oh, what if we spray this stuff?
Put the dryer sheets under the door.
Yeah, exactly. And so, of course, when the dad comes home, he says, it smells like a national park in here. I thought that was a funny line.
Did you get a new perfume, June? And she's like, no, I'm not really a piney type.
Yeah. I noticed it's apropos of nothing, but these are the days where we still say ice cream. We put the emphasis on cream instead of ice. Yes. The mom says something about that at dinner. But this is going to be another subtrope we have to track. The innocent person taking the fall for the cigarette. cigarette smoker.
Right.
Because they kind of figure out in short order, because of the telltale pipe, right? The house smells weird. The pipe changed color. Somebody smoked it. And so
it's got to be our teenager Wally.
Yeah, exactly. Beaver would never do such a thing. And so the dad's subtle way of trying to tease out a confession is at dinner talking about Pandora, right? We all know the story of Pandora.
He wants to march upstairs and like beat it out of him. Not really, but he's angry. He wants to go upstairs, and June convinces him, no, Wally's a good boy. He'll tell us if we give him the opportunity.
Yeah.
So they go about this whole like Pandora's box story guilt trip at dinner.
Yeah, and it's funny, nobody understands. Like, the kids are trying to take it at face value. Like, why is he telling us this?
Yeah, I think they thought, I mean, and we can tell from their conversation later, right? Like, they were waiting for the turn, like the reason,
exactly.
And then it just never came.
Wally goes, oh yeah, I'm starting to remember this. It's about like she opens the box and all of these like snakes and lizards and stuff come out.
Frogs and toads.
Yeah, and Beaver goes, gee, I hope when I get married, someone gives me a box of toads. And the dad explains, no, it's about curiosity. Does that remind you of anything?
God forbid women are curious.
Yeah, and so they're, like you said, when in their post-dinner conversation, Wally and Beaver, they're like, why was Dad... What was he on about?
Yeah.
Why was he saying that?
Well, and Wally's like, clearly he was trying to make us feel guilty about something.
Yeah, and then he remembers his stunt where he did something to the showers in gym class. He's like, oh, I know. He must have gotten wind of my, gym shower stunt where
like the prank where we turned off all the like he and his friend went in and like turned the nut so no hot water could come into the boys' showers.
And so he's like, all right, I guess that's what it is. So the dad comes up. I noticed, by the way, this dad has a Richard Nixon nose. I feel like if they made a Nixon biopic in like 1960, years before Nixon was in the public eye, this dad,
I mean, he was definitely still in the public eye.
Him. Maybe they wouldn't have made a movie
Kennedy.
at that time, though. Yeah, but it would have been a strange choice for a movie, I guess. But yeah, so he comes in, and this is where everything kind of comes to a head. The dad sort of says, like, excuse us, Beaver, go downstairs. Maybe your mom can help you with your spelling or something, right?
Yeah.
What a dismissive...
Trying to, like, get rid of him.
Get out of
here. He's like, Dad, can I
practice
stay?
Your spelling.
Well, because Beaver realizes that the dad was trying to make them feel guilty about something because Wally has figured it out.
But they're still confused, and it's their separate conversations.
Right.
Beaver goes down, talks to the mom. The dad talks to Wally.
No, but like what I'm saying is Beaver asks to stay because he has an inkling that this guilty conscience
and
thing...
maybe he can... clarify.
Exactly. He's worried. I don't think he thinks that the parents know about the smoking or whatever, but the guilty conscience thing, now that he knows about it, is working on him.
Yes, it's hard to say.
So he's starting to feel guilty, and he's like, I gotta fess up somehow.
He definitely feels guilty, but yes, Beaver is written in a way that it's hard to tell what he really is aware of.
So he goes downstairs, Dad and Wally stay upstairs, and, he's like... Do you have something you need to tell me, son?
Yeah, he's like, okay, fine. Here's how it all went down with the showers.
And Ward is like, what? No.
Yeah. And meanwhile, downstairs, the mom is explaining how they think that Wally smoked cigarettes. She goes, we need to understand Wally's at the age when boys think it's smart to try smoking.
Yeah.
She's like trying to break it down for Beaver.
And he's like, oh.
Yeah. And so, the dad comes down and he's like, this mofo will not bend.
It's like, I can't believe I gave him the opportunity and he just bold-faced lied to me. He's going to have to stay locked up in his room. And even before the dad comes downstairs, Beaver has been asking the mom, like, what happened?
Yeah.
And the mom's like, well, your dad found the pipe and he knew that Wally had been smoking. And he's like, well, how did he know Wally had been smoking? And she said it turned brown on the inside. And he goes, oh, so like he's like gaining the courage to come clean just as Dad comes downstairs.
Exactly. And so when the dad comes, we get this very sheepish but straightforward confession where Beaver says, it was me, I did it. You got to think this is the end of 75% of all Leave It to Beaver episodes, right? This little,
it was the last time too.
You see, Dad, here's what happened. And the dad says, but this, told you all about this, or, why didn't you bring this up when we were talking about this at dinner? And he goes, you didn't talk about smoking. You only talked about snakes and lizards. I found that line very funny. You can't be figurative with Beaver.
That's right. You can't be figurative with any of the kids. Clearly, the mom kind of gives a withering look to the dad, and the dad's just like, all right.
Be more direct next time.
I didn't go about that the right way. But then he also is like, I wanted to be direct, but you told me, to give him the opportunity. So anyway, he apologizes. He says, I'll stay locked in my room. And then the dad asks, is it Larry? He says it was me and Larry. He was over while everybody was gone. And he's like, well, did Larry,
did he put you up to it?
Put you up to it? Yeah, I was going to say like twist your arm, but you're right. He said, put you up to it. And he's like, no, we kind of both put each other up to it.
Yeah, and the dad is proud of him for that.
The dad's proud of him, but that is not at all what happened.
No, but it's the right thing for him to do, because it's still again, I don't want to be a total snitches get stitches.
Right,
but I think in that situation, it's yes, Larry was pressuring him, but he's his own person.
And
if your friends tell you to walk off the Brooklyn Bridge, you don't have to do it. And so, at the end of the day, they did, for all intents and purposes, they did put each other up to it.
No, and I think you're right, though, in terms of the lesson being you take responsibility for your own actions.
Yeah.
That is not something that we see in the mainstream today. Nobody ever takes responsibility.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
So I think that's a good lesson.
Yeah, the way the messaging is about this, like we said, this is late 50s, so we're not even into the 60s yet. Already, I feel I don't think there was ever a time when smoking was considered good for your health, even though they like to frame it that way. But in this time, it's still the physical danger of smoking isn't quite the headline. That's definitely part of it.
Right. It's something that you do when you get older. You can make the decision to smoke when you're 21.
Right. Kind of like we still feel about alcohol now in a lot of circles. And Beaver says straight up, if grown-ups say that something's so bad, there must be something really good about it. So it's very much your forbidden fruit mentality.
Because you're not allowed to have sugar. No, too many candy bars are bad for you. Too much sugar is bad. So when adults say it's bad for you, that's something I have to try.
Yeah, and then the parents in turn say, well, now maybe we hope you'll realize that sometimes the bad things are just bad. And so, the smoking thing is definitely here, but I feel the fundamental message in this one is more, listen to your parents, they know what's best. Smoking is one of the many examples of that.
Well, Father Knows Best is a different show.
That is true.
But so then the episode ends basically with Ward saying, I'm going to go upstairs and apologize to Wally. And Beaver's like, no, I should be the one, because this wouldn't have happened if I hadn't made this bad decision. So I'll go up and apologize. And we don't get to see the actual apology, but the next scene is them after they've gone to bed, and Beaver turns the light on. And Wally's like, why do you keep turning the light on? And he's like, I just can't go to sleep if I think you're mad at me, and he's like, why didn't you yell at me when I told you? Why aren't you upset with Dad for, reaming you out? And he's like, well, Wally's like, I left a box of nails open in the driveway last summer, and Dad got a flat tire the next day. And so I figure he didn't ever find out it was me. So I figured I had a good, bawling out coming.
Yeah, he's karmically even with the universe because he got away with something.
He's not mad at his brother.
Yeah, but all the subtropes firmly in place, the pine sol, the blaming somebody else and then eventually coming clean.
Yep, and the peer pressure.
Yeah. All right, moving on to Diff'rent Strokes.
Season 6, episode 12, Where There's Smoke.
Yeah, I think the last time we hung out with Arnold and Willis, they were being held hostage in a bank, where we only go for the big ones in Diff'rent Strokes. This, I have to say, we watched this under pretty horrible circumstances. It was like a crappy Japanese torrent site, really bad quality. It kept skipping, and yet little Gary Coleman's charisma just shines through those digital compression artifacts.
Yep.
The crappy audio notwithstanding. Yeah, I have to say with this one especially, I was really, we've talked about how fun he is. I was really impressed with not just his presence, but the writing for him. Like there's so many of his little lines where they give him a little precocious thing to say, just a funny little reaction to something that's happening that just kind of makes me go like, yeah, these guys, different strokes. It's a very specific thing. It's not for everybody, but they knew what they were doing with this.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons, we're in season 6, right? So he is and was meant to be the breakout star, and he is the breakout star of this show. We don't get a what you talking about Willis, we get a what you talking about Dudley, because his friend has come over to stay because his dad is having what we think at the beginning is a knee operation.
Yeah, they're already at the point where they're subverting their own catchphrases and they have to do variations on it. Yeah, this one, it begins with Willis and the sister and the housekeeper all enthralled in a murder movie, right? They're trying to figure out who the meat hook murderer is.
Yes.
And Arnold comes in and turns off the TV.
He's like, you're never going to guess what happened to me at school today.
Yeah.
And they're not paying any attention, and he goes over and he stands in front of the TV and they're like, get out of here, and he turns it off right at the very end of the movie, and they start yelling at him, and then the dad comes downstairs and he's like, what's with all the yelling? And they're like, Arnold, turn the TV off. And Arnold's still trying to explain what happened to him at school that day because he's so mad, and the dad's like, that's not nice, turn the TV back on, turns it back on, and it's the end credits. So they're all mad and they're like, we're never gonna figure out who the meat hook murderer is now. And the housekeeper says, I bet it was the housekeeper. And the older brother's like, no, it was the teenage boy. And then the daughter's like, no, I think it was. And we don't hear what she says, but
Yeah, this one is going to be all about the peer pressure. This is all about trying to fit in vis-a-vis smoking.
Right.
And so Arnold's whole thing is kind of like the Hogan kids in the Going to College episode. He's like, I'm not making an impression, man. I got no cred in school.
That's right. Nobody will pay attention to me. The big kids won't listen to me. So he is supposed to be in 8th grade at this point, which I think we figured out last time we watched this, that by this point in the show, he was actually 20 something.
Oh yeah. Or 47. I don't know.
Not really 47, but he was definitely 20s. And so he was wanting to make his costumes cooler and that kind of stuff. But this episode, we don't get any of that. He is full nerded out. And
it's all about him getting a sweater from his dad.
in his school colors.
Yes, he's
so
very
proud.
excited about that.
And so, he is bummed out because the 9th graders don't want to be friends with him.
Yes, he tried to introduce himself and one of them hung his coat on them, he said.
Yes, they thought I was a coat rack. And then the dad's like, well, that's a way to hook them. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. So they don't really write well for anyone else. So Arnold, his friend's coming over and they are sitting down, they're having a conversation with the dad about how, what are we going to try next time to get the guys at school to notice us? And the dad has a few stupid ideas.
Well, but the dad's overall message, I thought, was very true. Dudley comes over, his dad drops him off there. His dad's going to be a presence in the end of this. And Dudley and Arnold are both like, what can we do? Nobody likes us at school. And Mr. Drummond is like, if you want to make friends, you have to extend yourself. And this just rung very true to me, because I feel like when I was in 7th grade, 8th grade, I was like these kids, everybody sucks because they don't like us. And now when I look back on it, I was like, no, I was just a shy, squirrely kid. That's all. They weren't, bullying me or anything. And so Mr. Drummond is like, you got to just put yourself out there. Why don't you invite kids over? And that's what they do.
Yeah. So they invite the cool kids over, and the 9th grade boys come over and they're hanging out. The housekeeper brings food, and Arnold's trying to get him to say isn't his new sweater cool? And they're making fun of him.
The kids are somehow not impressed by his new sweater in the school colors.
And then when the housekeeper leaves, or no, she hasn't come in yet. One of the kids is like, oh, great, coast is clear or whatever, and pulls out cigarettes.
First, they want to watch X-rated videos. Apparently,
That's right. Is everything X-rated?
Yeah, Arnold lured them over by saying, "Oh, I've got all kinds of cool videos at my house," and so that's why they're there. So they're like, "All right, Drummond, show us your videos." And they want X-rated. He doesn't have it, and so they're like, "Oh, let's all smoke. That'll be fun."
Yes, this one of the boys pulls out a cigarette or pulls out a pack of cigarettes, passes them around, and they get to Arnold, and he's like, no. And then they go to Dudley, and Dudley's like, no, thanks, I've got my own.
Well, when Arnold, this might be the only time this happened in this lineup, but I feel like this is definitely a cliche for the non-smoker to say, I'm trying to cut down, right? That's always the joke. And it's hilarious, I think, when he goes, I only have one in the morning with my milk.
With my milk, that's right.
Very funny.
I forgot that's what he said. That was a really funny line. But yeah, so Dudley has his own pack. So Arnold's looking at him like completely betrayed. Like, what are you doing? And the boys are all like, oh man, this Dudley kid's cool. And then the housekeeper comes back with food and they're all trying to hide their cigarettes. And she's like, she smells it. And then she's like, is someone smoking in here? Is anybody smoking in here? And then Dudley opens his mouth. This is how I got caught too. There were like, we saw the little heads in the, we were sitting outside having lunch and we saw the administrators' heads in the windows, and somebody said, oh, look, the administrators are watching us through the windows. Everybody, keep it down, like keep the cigarette down or whatever, because we were passing it around in a circle. And I was like, where? And I looked up and said, where? And all the smoke came out of my mouth. And that's how I got caught, and nobody else did in my little group that were all smoking.
Well, in this group, there's several of them are smoking, and they're kind of remorseless about it. Like, first of all, this isn't their house. They don't care. It's not their housekeeper.
But they also think they're trying to look cool.
Oh, yeah, but they tell her, like, well, look, Pearl, lots of kids in our school smoke. Like, they're just
but they do hide it.
Oh, yeah, no, they know they're not supposed to be. But when they get caught, they're just kind of like, hey, man, like, get with it.
Yeah, what's wrong with you? And so she makes them put them all out. And then the boys are like, this place is lame. Yeah, let's get out of here. Let's go somewhere else. You want to come, Dudley? And Dudley's like, no, I'm going to hang out here. And they're like, all right, we'll see you at school. And Arnold's like, you going to see me at school? And they're like, probably not.
Yeah, Dudley says to him straight up, you really blew it with the guys because you don't smoke.
Yeah.
So again, just very, very simple, straightforward, story beat here.
Exactly.
So Dudley doesn't leave with the other kids. He stays and hangs out with Arnold.
He stays and chills, and he's still Arnold's good friend. He's just letting him know, like, hey man, if you want to get in good with these guys, apparently you have to smoke, and it's not that big of a deal. I smoke. I've got my dad's cigarettes, my dad
And just
smokes.
to be clear, because this other kid is an actual kid. This is not someone with a certain condition that makes them look younger than they are. And so I feel like this gives us more grounding and seeing, oh, okay, clearly prepubescent kid, 11, 12 years old, something like that.
Yeah. So they're upstairs in Arnold's room, and he's like, well, I guess I'll try it.
He says, let's hit Tobacco Road. And then he's additionally scandalized when Dudley produces his lighter. He goes, oh, you have your own lighter? And Dudley goes, sure, it makes you look sophisticated. And to be fair, it is a nice Zippo lighter.
It is a nice lighter. It's one of those ones that, we've seen this gag in cartoons, right? Where like you go to light the cigarette and then the cigarette gets caught in the lighter, hatch thing.
It's a whole
and then
mechanism.
You pull away and the cigarette's still sticking out of the lighter.
There's a skill in using these old-timey lighters. And so, of course, Arnold does that wrong and gets his cigarette stuck. And then, when they finally start smoking, it's kind of like Leave It to Beaver. We don't have the weird music or anything, but we get a close-up of Arnold just like sucking on this cigarette. And it is a bizarre sight.
And then, so he tries smoking, and then they get the room spray air freshener, again, piney fresh, trying to make the room smell fresh, because I don't know, I guess they were just like, oh, it's kind of, stinky in here or something. Let's clean it up.
They realize it smells terrible like smoke. Also, Arnold drops burning ember on his precious sweater, his brand new school color sweater. Again, something I relate to heavily, messing up nice clothes goes in an instant with a little, a cigarette ash.
With a little bit of ash. Wow. So, he's all upset. He knows that his dad's going to figure out something happened because he's got this hole in his sweater. And then we go back downstairs. The dad and the two older siblings are now home when the dad is like, why does it smell weird in here?
Yes, and Pearl takes the blame.
The housekeeper takes the blame. She says, oh, well, I picked up the habit of smoking, don't you know?
No.
I quit for years, but I just started again.
She does the bad sitcom actor thing of lying in a way that a 2-year-old child could tell you were lying because they need to tell us, the audience, that it's a lie.
Like we wouldn't already know.
Right.
But yeah.
But it also, she's doing the same bit as George Costanza does in Seinfeld when he has to pretend to be a smoker, and so he's coughing down the cigarette going, yeah, can't stop now, they got a hold on me, trying to pretend like you're addicted to this thing that you clearly find repulsive.
Right.
And so she's
she doesn't smoke. She isn't actually
no, she's not doing it, but she's like, I guess I just couldn't keep away from him.
Couldn't kick the habit. And so he's like, well, I'm really disappointed in you. And he's like, just make sure you're not smoking in the house. And she's like, yes, of course. And so then, off they go. And then Willis goes upstairs and he's like, why, it smells weird up here. And then he leaves. And then the dad comes upstairs and Arnold's holding his hand. He's got his sweater on and he's holding his arm in such a way, like his right arm, to cover this hole that's in his sweater. And it looks a little bit like he's holding his stomach.
Yeah. And so the dad asks, what's wrong? Are you in pain? And,
first he's like, oh, I guess Pearl must have been up here too. And Arnold is like, yeah, she must have been.
Yeah. Arnold goes, it's just an old Little League injury acting up. And so I'm beginning to sort of crack the code here. The secret to writing for Arnold Drummond is just everything he says is something that would be said by somebody in their 70s.
Right.
And it's funny because he's saying it. And you just switch, like coffee for milk or, Vietnam for Little League, and you got your joke.
You're good to go. So he's like, nothing, my sweater's fine. I'm good. I'm fine, because the dad doesn't think anything about a sweater. He thinks his stomach is upset. And he keeps chasing him around, trying to be like, let me see. I need to check you out. Like, he's not a doctor. What are you going to tickle his stomach? Get the fuck out of here.
Well, he just wants to see what's wrong with him.
Right. Why is he holding his stomach like that? And then the minute he moves his hand away, obviously he sees the hole and he's like, that looks like a cigarette burn. And he tries to blame it on Pearl again, and the dad's not having any of it.
Yes. So again, we get same old thing, coming clean. It wasn't Pearl. It was me. It was me and Dudley. And then we get a very sort of heavy, dark ending to all of this when Dudley's dad comes back.
Right. So he hasn't, this is all like within the same day. So he hasn't gone in for his surgery yet. He's going in for his surgery like the next morning. That's why he's there early. And so the Mr. Drummond is like, I've got to call your dad. And I know he hasn't gone in for surgery yet. So like, he's going to want to know this. And so he calls the dad, and the dad comes over, and we've got Dudley's dad, Mr. Drummond, Arnold, and Dudley all sitting there, and they're having a real hard conversation about smoking.
We get a variation on the 80s standby. From you, Dad. I learned it from watching you.
That's right.
We get the Dudley's dad going like, how could you possibly think that smoking is okay? And Dudley's like, well, you smoke.
You smoke. And he's like, well, where did you even get cigarettes? And he's like, well, I guess you leave them around and I take them. And so that all comes out, and he's like, you need to understand that this is really bad. I'm not going in for knee surgery.
Yeah.
I'm going in to have a lung taken out.
Yeah.
Because they found a tumor. And like, there's no gasp from the audience. There's just like no reaction from the kids or Mr. Drummond.
By the way, this is like a 34-year-old man saying this. Like, he does not like, hey, whatever. I applaud them. By all means, show how dangerous smoking is.
Yeah.
But I gasped. I was like, gee, because once you sort of see where this is going, where the dad starts going, well, I got to tell you, I didn't want to stress you out, but that doctor's visit I had, I see what it's going to be. I start thinking, oh, emphysema, or something like that. Not I'm having a lung removed.
A whole lung removed, which I was like, what? Because they found a dark spot. And so that's what is happening. And so, and he's like, I want you to promise me, both of you, that you're not ever going to smoke again, because he doesn't say it's addictive, but he's basically like, once you start, it's really hard to stop, and I don't want this to happen to you. And they're like, okay, we won't, we promise. And then the dad leaves, and the camera is in the hall, and the dad immediately takes out a cigarette and lights up. And that's the last frame.
Freeze frame on this dad character lighting a cigarette on his way to lung removal surgery.
Right.
Chilling. Truly chilling. I'd say...
Diff'rent Strokes was not pulling any punches.
No, definitely, Diff'rent Strokes. This was maybe the same writer that went on to make all of those commercials where 1,000 people drop dead in the middle of the street to impress upon you the impact of smoking. But like we said, the peer pressure, the blaming somebody else, the confessions, all the squirreliness with the parents, all the tropes alive and well. Let's keep it going with King of the Hill.
Season 1, Episode 10, Keeping Up with Our Joneses.
Yep, so we haven't talked about King of the Hill yet. This is a animated sitcom, as we do once in a while. So this is a brainchild of Mike Judge, who I think is a very fascinating figure. This is a guy who, he's been around since the 90s, and for somebody who's not super prolific, he has made a huge impact when you consider sort of pound for pound some of the projects that he did. Beavis and Butthead, obviously.
That was the first one that I knew about.
Yes, Beavis and Butthead started out as cartoons on Liquid Television. That was the MTV animation sort of sketch show, no pun intended, and then they made it into its own show. And, Beavis and Butthead itself, for better or worse, iconic, right? For a certain age, everybody remembers Beavis, everybody remembers Cornholio, and the whole...
I need TP for my bunghole.
Yeah, the whole shot. Even the fact that the SNL skit with Gosling 40 years later...
Just now, happened a few months ago or whatever, and everybody was just going all in on that.
Yeah, exactly. I think the 1999 movie Office Space, for me...
Oh my God, such a great movie.
Comedies of all time.
It was so quotable. I remember everybody, why does it say paper jam when there is no paper jam?
Yes, I think Office Space in 99 and the first Austin Powers in 97 were real examples of these movies that came out and were kind of like, okay, that's funny. And then over the following decades, just really became canonized as these beloved masterpieces. And then, of course, Idiocracy,
that?
Yes, Idiocracy is written and directed by Mike Judge. And every other day somebody makes, writes some think piece about how Idiocracy
has come true.
Right. Silicon Valley, I thought, is a great sort of HBO quasi sitcom.
Right. I remember he did do that.
Also, Mike Judge.
That was really good.
Yeah, and then, honestly, his other stuff, like the movie Extract with Jason Bateman, is really good.
Oh, that's funny, too.
It didn't have the same impact as those other things. But then, that kind of is his resume in terms of being a creator, a director, etc. And so when he decides to do something, it's usually it makes an impact.
It's a thing.
Now that said, King of the Hill, I was never a huge fan of this.
Well, that's because they speak like this.
That is the reason, yes. And I feel terrible about it because honestly, this is the kind of project where the creator is basically saying, let me show you my world, right? Mike Judge is from Texas.
Yep.
He's saying, this is where I'm from.
These are people I know.
These are the people I love, and I want to give you a taste of it. And I'm basically I don't really like it. And look, I've acknowledged it before. It's just my prejudice. I grew up in the New York City area. The other cultures from around the world had this intrigue to me, whereas other cultures from around the country just seemed kind of weird.
Yeah.
And these, same thing with Roseanne and My Name is Earl, just Grace Under Fire, the shows with these sort of working class.
Anybody involving Chuck Lorre, apparently.
Either these like Southern or Middle America shows, I would kind of turn my nose up at. I just found them a little annoying.
Yeah.
And so King of the Hill is one that I was always intrigued by because of the Mike Judge thing, but I didn't watch it that much.
Well, I'm here to tell you I spent plenty of time watching King of the Hill. Yeah. It was a favorite of one of my exes, and so we watched a lot of it. And I think the show is funny, but the issue that I kind of consistently bump up against in this show is that your main character is he is like the epitome of the, dumb dad kind of character, but there's a take on it, right? Yeah. The take is he has Hank Hill. So this show is about a family. It's about Hank and his wife Peggy and their son Bobby, and they've got a niece who lives with them named Luann, voiced by the R.I.P. Brittany Murphy.
Yeah.
And so that is the main family, and then they live in this neighborhood that Hank has grown up in, has lived there his whole life, and his 3 other friends all have houses on the same street, and they hang out on the side road, and they drink beers and they talk about life. And that's it. That's the setup of the show. It is so sitcom-y.
Yeah.
It is
low concept, yes. Straightforward. Like I said, here's our characters, here's our little town, and we'll have things happen.
And it is mundane. That is the word that you would use to describe, mundane things happen. The thing that grounds the show is that Hank Hill, even though his kind of conservative views and his branch of conservatism kind of puts him out of step with the changing world around him and the changing ideas around him, he is such a good-hearted guy. He has a solid moral center that kind of gets him through, even though, in this episode, they go to a Smokers Anonymous kind of meeting, and it comes out that his punishment for Bobby for getting caught smoking was you have to smoke a carton of cigarettes, which that's an old-timey punishment that I've definitely heard about. And the place just tries to tear him apart. They're like, you can't do that to your kid. Look what you did. That's child abuse. And he's like, what? I didn't come here for this. I came here for help. Get me out of here. And he leaves. And so it's it encapsulates that kind of thing of he definitely doesn't have it all figured out, but what he does have is this sort of solid core moral
Yes,
center.
And of course,
he's a good person.
Yeah, and between being an animated show, which we talk about with The Simpsons, it gives you a different sort of leeway into how you can characterize people in situations. You can get away with more. You can have people do things that are more ridiculous.
Right.
And it just works in animation. And Hank Hill, of course, is Mike Judge doing that standard voice that he's done in other things. That's just his sort of this is how people from where I come
drawl.
from. Yeah, this is how we talk. This probably how my dad talked.
Well, he doesn't have the whiny whistling thing that you're doing. He doesn't have the old prospector sound.
But he doesn't have that. But he does do this thing. He gets a little more high pitched than a normal person would.
Yes, he does.
Both high pitched and a little bassy at the same time. And so,
that's right.
and so I feel like those two things, between the animation and the fact that he's doing the voice himself, he's able to completely control the tone of it and make it lovable and, sort of warm and fuzzy at the same time as it's so misguided.
And it's a comfortable thing for people who watch sitcoms because we're laughing at the dad, as per usual, right?
Yeah.
The difference I find in this show is that Hank learns lessons every episode. Hank grows.
Yeah.
Hank is not Tim the Toolman Taylor, who never like gets his comeuppance a million times, but never actually learns his lesson. Like Hank learns, and he doesn't change the core of who he is. I mean, he's still a conservative Texan, but like he is listening and growing and learning. So it's really I enjoy watching the show. It's not one that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go binge watch some King of the Hill. But this episode I've seen. I like when this came up in our list, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that. That's good. Yeah, that's a funny one.
Well, also something I noted as the story progresses in terms of what you're talking about, the mom doesn't have to be the nagging authority figure in this. She's going to go on the same weird journey of rekindling her affair with tobacco as the dad does. So yeah, it doesn't, even though in some ways it shares DNA with the Ray Romanos and the Tim the Toolmans of the world, it doesn't have that lame thing of like, oh, we all know we have to clean up our act for our wives, right?
Yeah, no, it doesn't have that at all. They have like a true and loving kind of equal partnership. Hank, we'll hear him say it a million times, he sells propane and propane accessories down at the local propane shop. And Peggy is a substitute Spanish teacher, but she doesn't really speak Spanish. Okay. So we get really funny bits throughout the series of her, being like, no habla inglés, just saying really, like speaking really bad Spanish.
Yeah. A little bit. You get the Napoleon Dynamite thing,
right.
I feel like.
Yeah. But she also has this thing of she's got that self-confidence, even though she doesn't know how to do anything. That's like part of her character that you'll see in bits and pieces throughout time. It's almost like a Peter from Peter Griffin from Family Guy kind of thing. Like she's not as ridiculous as he is, but she definitely is like
leap before you look.
Oh yeah, she's like, I can do that. I can do anything, and then can't but thinks she can, and so she's a fun character.
This is going to be about the boy. What's his name?
Bobby.
Right.
Bobby.
So Bobby and his friend are playing in the dumpster.
Yes.
And
they're trying to find the pieces for, they're calling it like a power cart, but I'm thinking like a go-kart.
They find the official cigarette of the Canadian Mounted Police.
That's right. Did you say it looked like it was Marlboro, but instead it said Manitoba?
Yeah.
That was great.
Again, with the discarded cigarettes.
Yes.
Right. This time they're not putting the tobacco in an envelope. They're just going to smoke the cigarette. And this, I notice with all of these, there's less of a sort of, they get caught quicker than I would expect, and in this one, they go, again, we're going to get the sort of surrealist, impressionistic, like horror movie take on the smoking, because they're going to go into like, sort of like a bathroom, like a public bathroom.
Yeah, I think they're at a gas station dumpster.
Yeah, like a rest stop or something.
And then they go into the bathroom.
Yeah, and so it's dark in there, so you just see them, like the light from their lighters trying to smoke the cigarette. They do all, the animation is all kind of stylized like that.
Yep.
But basically they get caught by Hank, the dad, immediately.
So, and there was no setup for this. So I don't know why, like, the dad and his best friend and Bobby are all there at this random truck stop. But whatever it is, for whatever the reason, Hank goes to open the door and he's like, is someone in this bathroom? And then he asks in Spanish, and like in broken Spanish. And Bobby's like, no, sir.
Yeah, well, he goes, sí,
that's
ocupado.
Right. Sí.
Yeah.
And Bobby has this really funny sort of gravelly voice, but high, because he's voiced by a woman like most young boy characters are. And he has this sort of like gravelly high voice like this. And so he sounds already like he's a smoker, which is kind of funny. But then anyway, so Hank pulls on, he was like, Bobby? And he pulls open the door and the cigarette is hanging from his lip like Humphrey Bogart. He's like, you got to dangle it from your lip like Humphrey Bogart. That when he's trying to convince Arnold to look cool smoking.
Yeah, so when they go home and he tells the wife, the mom says, I gave up smoking so you would be free from birth defects, and this is how you repay me.
That's right.
Right. So, yeah, we get the dad says, like you mentioned before, he goes, I wish my dad had the parenting skills to do this to me. Right. He's going to do the old, you have to smoke a carton of cigarettes thing, which was definitely a thing that I heard of when I was a kid. I would have to imagine now you can't do this.
Oh God, this just sounds horrible. Why would you do that?
If it's bad for you,
why would you make a kid do it so much that it's just bananas.
Well, I get it's like an aversion therapy. Like I think it's just you make them sick at the very notion of it. I think is the idea. Like I think it would be fairly effective. The only question is, would you give your kid emphysema in the process of doing it?
Right. I know. The whole thing just sounds horrible. But yeah, so that is the punishment that he doles out. And he gets annoyed with Bobby, which we see happen lots throughout the series. So Bobby is an indoor kid. He is into prop comedy. He wants to be in his school's improv troupe. He is very much like a nerdy, not athletic kid, whereas Hank was a sports guy in high school, and his friends all were the same, and so he is just kind of constantly embarrassed of his son.
Also, like you said, conservative, so a little bit of the boomer versus newer kid thing.
So he's just like, Bobby, you're doing it wrong. Like, if you're gonna smoke, you gotta at least smoke like an American.
Yeah, he says you're smoking like a European commie or something.
He says you're smoking like every bad guy in a World War II movie or something.
Now, we should note here, this is where, even though we're going to get lots of our same overlapping subtropes, the message starts to change, right? Because this is 1997, and I was just looking up. I knew this happened in Full House. We didn't cover that one because we've covered Full House plenty, but Full House has an episode with our friend Gia, right? Convincing Stephanie to smoke. That was 1994. So you got to think between Leave It to Beaver and Full House, that's what, 35 years of sitcoms telling you, hey, kids, remember not to smoke. Right. So by the time we get to 1997, you've got somebody as smart as Mike Judge making the show. We're going to start to get our undermining of the tropes like we usually see in the 21st century sitcoms. And
Greg Daniels is on this too. Isn't Greg Daniels from The Office?
The Office, definitely. Okay. Yeah. So I guess this was one of his early things. And so we get Hank showing him the correct American way to hold a cigarette. And then there's a few other, he has to show him how to light it properly or whatever.
Right.
And, we can see where this is going. Hank is sort of.
He's like, wait. You got it. You're not even inhaling. You're hotboxing it. Right. You got to inhale slowly.
Yeah. And he is rekindling his own love affair with the seductress tobacco.
That's right. With nicotine. And so Bobby gets all the way through the 200 cigarettes, or nearly all the way through, and is green, and then is like, I gotta throw up, and steps, off camera, and we hear him retching. And so then Hank is like, all right, job well done. Goes out into the alley with his friends, and the water from the hose that he's told Bobby to, hey, when you're finished, put the hose on that, boy. And so he goes out, and then we see he's standing in the alley with his friends, and the water's coming running on down. So he's standing next to his friend Dale. They always stand in the same order.
Yeah.
And Dale is a smoker. Dale always has a beer and a cigarette when he's in the alley. He's the only one of the friends that does. And is this where Hank starts smoking right then?
Yes. We get Hank whips out a cigarette and starts nonchalantly smoking with the friend, and all three of his friends are shocked, and he's like, yeah, now I smoke.
He's I have a few. I figured I'd take it up again. Oh no, that doesn't happen first, right? Because the first time he smokes is when he
takes a smoke break with his worker friend.
That's right, with the guy at the propane, and that he manages at at the propane shop, and the guy's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Hill, like, I know you don't want us smoking. And he's like, oh, it's all right. Come on, let's sit down here and have one. And they start telling stories. And then we are meant to understand, basically, they spend the whole afternoon as a smoke
they become
break.
friends. And it's that thing of like, oh, hey, remember this? Remember how you used to like commune with your fellow man over a cigarette?
Yes,
and like,
that's right.
Like, smoking is social. Smoking is good, because it leaves with them going like, we should hang out. We'll have our wives call each other and stuff. And so, yeah, it's like, Hank is like remembering all the good things about smoking.
His wife shows up at work. Peggy shows up at work and is like, hey, Hank, you want to get some lunch? Got time for a lunch break? And he's like, oh, yeah, and kind of flicks the cigarette, and it goes towards some spilled propane, and the guy dives to save it. And then they drive off to lunch, and, they're kind of, oh, Bobby's feeling pretty awful today about everything. And he's like, well, that's, meant to be, and da-da-da. And then they get to the end of their lunch, and Hank pulls out a cigarette and lights it up in front of Peggy. And she says, Hank, what in the world are you doing?
Very casually, he just takes out the cigarettes. And he goes, sometimes you just have to relax and enjoy life's flavors. That's
right. And he said Bobby didn't smoke all the packs, and I figured it would be wasteful. So here you go. And tells his wife, it's all right. We're not being wasteful. And she's like, oh, Hank, I don't know, And he's like, don't you remember when we used to smoke, all the fun we used to get up to? And there's this great montage of them like smoking together in high school and I guess college, because she grew up in Montana.
Yeah, and so they sort of rekindle their romance thanks to tobacco. They decide to go back to Smokies. They're like, remember that club where we used to go when we smoked? And then this is another sort of chilling moment, kind of like the last one, where they get to Smokies and find out that Smokey himself is dead. The maitre d's like, oh no, it's a good thing. If you would have seen him the last few years after it had spread. And it's just like, oh, geez.
Yeah, and they're just like, oh. And then we get a cutaway to Bobby at school, right? During this, like after the dream flashback or somewhere in the middle there, we get a cutaway to Bobby at school, who is like tweaking.
Yeah.
He is like, he's jonesing so hard for nicotine that he like can't sit still. He's snapping at people. He's like balling up pieces of paper and like ripping things. I mean, he's totally wigging out at school, just like gnawing to get a cigarette.
Yeah, he's withdrawing. We have, when Hank and Peggy finally get to their smoking section, it's all like
the scene.
Horrible old, people choking.
Yeah, but this is the scene that I love, right? So they say, and I was waiting for it to be the other way around, because I was like, the place is called Smokies. It's a jazz club. They used to go there. It's in Texas. Maybe, even though it's 97, maybe it's gonna still be this, like, because everything else that they've come to with the smoking has been like a dream. Yeah. They're so happy. It's bringing them back all these memories. It's joyful. Yeah. And then we get the hostess telling them about Smokey dying, and she says, do you want smoking or not? And they were like, smoking, of course. And she walks them through the nice club all the way to the back to this tiny little door. She opens the door, and it is exactly what you're describing. It looks like an Atlantic City casino. Yeah. A bunch of like old people with oxygen tanks next to them and cigarettes in the other hand, hunched over a bar, drinking their, cocktails or whatever, just coughing and clearing their throats, and you can't see, and it's all dingy. It was just awful. And they were like, this isn't what we remembered.
That kind of burst the nicotine bubble. And so we have the first mention in any of these episodes of patches, right?
Right.
Of like,
they go home technology. And Luann is like, I'm not losing, there was an earlier mention of people look like white trash when they smoke, and she gets all upset because she's like, I lived in a trailer park. Yeah, she's like, I lived in a trailer park. And she's all upset. And so she's like, that's it. I've already lost one family to dysfunction. I'm not losing another one, because that's why she lives with them, because her mom's in jail and her dad's a ne'er-do-well. And so she's like, we're cleaning you guys up. And so she has created this like shaker maraca thing to keep the dog from eating her cruelty-free makeup. And now she's shaking it at the family every time they try to go get a cigarette.
Yeah.
All three of them are withdrawing. They're all nasty and like sniping at each other at dinner.
Yeah, there's a point where, like, at the end, they're just, like, they're crawling on the ground, like, covered in nicotine patches,
and,
right?
like yelling at each because it's not working.
It descends into chaos. And, that was where I wrote down that I like that the mom doesn't get stuck in the authority figure role. She gets to be just as weird as the rest of them. And, like I said, it's sort of, we're doing away with the kind of preachy, don't smoke thing. Like, at this point, that kind of goes without saying.
No, we're showing them how crazy it is and how bad it is.
Yeah, if you're watching King of the Hill, like, you probably know cigarettes are bad for you. It's 1997, whatever. And so, they're just kind of having fun with it.
Yeah, 1997, peak when Amy was smoking.
Yeah. I was probably just getting started at that time.
Yeah. So there's just a bunch of different scenes of them trying to get a cigarette, sneaking off in the middle of the night to try to get a cigarette. Bobby's like crawling up behind some guy at a bus stop who lit up a cigarette and trying to like sniff the secondhand smoke to get a fix. Yeah. They make it through that really like hard, long first night, and they decide they're going to go to like the Smokers Anonymous meeting. And that's where it comes out that Hank has made his child smoke 200 cigarettes as the punishment, and everybody's all mad at him. And so then they all run out.
Yeah.
Man, they have one more night where they find the one cigarette.
Yeah.
They're all trying to get that one cigarette, and it eventually like gets blown out the window in the rain because there's like a tropical storm coming through. And so it gets blown out the window in the rain, and they all are like leaning out the window crying, trying to get it, and they're all sad. And they kind of make it through that night, just like yelling at each other, hiding under blankets. Oh, at one point Bobby sets his blanket on fire because he's trying to smoke under his covers so nobody will find him. And they make it through the night, and they wake up in the morning and they're like, okay, we made it. And Hank's like, isn't this the most beautiful day? And we look outside and it's destruction everywhere from the tropical storm that came through.
Yeah, but we're sort of supposed to understand, like, they freed themselves from the clutches of their nicotine addiction.
Right.
And the music
So they're throwing
swells.
a flat football around the backyard.
Yeah, exactly. And so, happy ending. Everything's back to normal. And so, like I said, it's not as much of a PSA. It's continuing all those tropes, but it's like kind of compressing them to the first half and then kind of going in this weird direction after that. Yeah,
well, and look, this show has such great voice actors. You've got Kathy Najimy plays the mom, plays Peggy, and Stephen Root, who is from Office, Office Space, right? The movie, the Mike Judge movie. Uh-huh. But he is uncredited, but he does the voice of Bill Dauterive, which is his like sort of round, pudgy, depressed, fat friend.
Okay.
We only get a little blip of him in this episode.
Yeah.
He is my favorite. He's my favorite character. I'm always like, oh, somebody just love him.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, like, this was fine, but I kind of stand by, like, it wasn't super funny to me. And there is it's just maybe the difference in TV show versus movie or whatever, but it's like, I don't see the through line.
This episode was going for all the funny,
no,
though.
Fair enough.
I think obviously these episodes are a little bit different. They're not as funny as the ones that are a laugh a minute. But of the three that we've talked about so far, this one is the funniest.
I guess. I mean, it's such an apples to oranges thing. I personally laughed more at Arnold's one-liners, I think, than anything in this. But it's like, I see the through line from Beavis and Butthead to this. Okay. And obviously, this is more fleshed out, and it's a network sitcom. It's not like Beavis and Butthead in a lot of ways, but you see...
Watching Metallica videos and being like, hey, yeah,
But
cool.
You see the cultural connection that they maybe could have grown up and matured into Frank Hill over time, and just the animation, the aesthetic sort of connection. Whereas, like, the Silicon Valley, Idiocracy, Office Space, like, I don't see the same masterful humor and cleverness in those. Like, I just don't see that same personality in King of the Hill, and vice versa, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I just need more of a sample size.
Well, but I also don't think, and I remember being surprised when Office Space was Mike Judge. Like, I thought Office Space was hilarious, so funny, but it was nothing like Beavis and Butthead or King of the Hill. Like, they're just not alike at all. And same with Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is like a whole different level of like layers of humor, whereas I don't see that connected to this.
No, I see Silicon Valley and Office Space as being of a piece, the way loosely that I could see Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill being of a piece. Yeah, I think it's just different sides to him, and I think he is somebody that draws upon his own experience, and I think he has experience in the world of technology and stuff. And I think, like we said at the beginning, King of the Hill really is kind of him going, let me give you a little taste of my world, and it just not really being my cup of tea. Moving on to Abbott Elementary.
Season 3, Episode 4, Smoking.
Yeah, this is our second time covering Abbott Elementary. This is a brand new show, 2024. And as such, it is not tropey. It's doing interesting, smart things. It's not falling back on the same dopey stuff. No pun intended, I guess. We should say that cigarette smoking is the sort of catalyst here, but this is going to be more about all kinds of drugs. I would say this is also a PSA, but a very different kind of PSA.
Yeah.
And is advancing a particular idea.
Right. But it's the idea that there is no nuance in the messaging that we all grew up with. We have a version of the DARE program come to the school. What's this one called? Fade. Yeah. And so, you know, that like DARE started in my school after I left elementary school.
Me too.
And so I never...
Yeah, my brother did.
Right, exactly. My little brother did too. I never was a part, like, got the benefit of this DARE program.
You didn't have Officer Tim or Officer Bill.
Well, we had Officer Friendly, but he did bike jamborees, and I know you don't like Officer Friendly. There were two different Officer Friendlies. There was Officer Friendly Ron and Officer Friendly Dan, and they were, like, one of them did the K to 2 groups, and one of them did the 3 to 5 groups. So you like graduated into Officer Ron's
what was it, a regular thing or something?
Yeah, and it was mostly bike safety. They had a bike jamboree every year, which was so much fun, and they would give away tons of bikes to all these kids, and it was a really cool program. And they did talk about like not using drugs and not smoking, but not in the same way that DARE did.
Right. It wasn't the focus of the whole thing.
Yeah.
So this is going to start out with Janine, our main character, Kenta Brunson, who's the creator of the show.
Right.
Her job has changed, so now there's a sub taking over her class for a while because she's working in the administration.
She's in the district office doing a fellowship. It doesn't say, like, she doesn't tell us what the fellowship is for. Maybe that happened in earlier episodes, but she is now working for the district office, but she likes to come back and visit the school and see the kids and see her friends, and whatever her role is in this fellowship at the district office, she is able to go back and be in schools.
Yeah, so we're going to have a weird sort of A and B story where we've got the whole sort of cast dealing with this cigarette smoking and drug story at the same time as we've got Janine dealing with this thing that this teacher, this young white woman who is this very sort of touchy-feely, I don't believe in grades and rules and grammar and stuff like that. And she probably is all over Instagram and just that very sort of obnoxious modern stereotype. Janine is dealing with the fact that this substitute teacher is conducting her class in ways that she infuriate her.
Right. She's not following the tried and true methods that I have developed over my past 3 years in this classroom, which made me kind of giggle because I was like, your tried and true methods that you've developed in 3 years? Okay, honey.
Yeah, well, which is what we'll eventually sort of get to.
Right.
This is an interesting kind of story, the way it's presented. The whole smoking thing, like, we jump off with that from the start. There's
right,
police
there's a
and
fire alarm. There's a fire alarm got
gathered
pulled
there.
or something happened, and they're all out like in a fire drill. And the same Mike O'Malley, the same fire deputy guy that was there last time, he comes out. That's when we get the bit about like, I didn't do it. My candles aren't lit here anymore. And then he's like, no, it was somebody lit a cigarette in the boys' room. And then we get this almost like Hank Hill flashbacky kind of thing between the redheaded teacher who's like the local who talks with that like Philly accent or whatever. And she and the fire sergeant guy, they're like reminiscing about smoking when they were teenagers and when they had their first cigarettes. And remember when dad used to, remember when your dad used to smoke and the whole house smelled like that. And
she has something like she can identify the cigarette by the smell. She goes, one whiff and I'm 14 again.
Yeah. I mean, 16, a couple years later. and Janine's like, that would make you 16. And she's like, yeah. And like, does the look to the camera. But so it's like this fun little moment where you see these older two, the fire sergeant and this older teacher, kind of have this memory moment of remember what it was like when our parents all smoked and we all smoked in the 70s. And it was like everybody smoked in the 70s and 80s
Smoke
and it was
nostalgia.
normal. Right.
Yeah.
Which is what Peggy and Hank had as well.
Exactly. Yeah, you could totally imagine them
In that,
going
like,
down
same
a similar
time frame,
road. Yeah, having this same sort of like rekindled romance. What happens? It's on the spot. They bring out this kid who is very,
looks like a very large fifth grader because this is an elementary school, and
he
is definitely a middle school age kid.
But he's very much characterized as just this sort of nice, quiet kid that's been caught smoking.
Right.
And so they say, something, you should be ashamed or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he says like, well, I didn't know that it wasn't allowed. There's no signs about that.
Yeah. And so they're like, what are you talking about? So the next scene is all the teachers in the teacher's lounge, and they're looking, different. They're looking at the rule book. Somebody's looking at, a binder. Somebody's looking at the internet. They're all trying to like cross-reference all the different
through
rules,
the statutes,
the school website, everything. And they're like, we say, no, I don't even remember what the ridiculous example they gave was. We have like no open-toed shoes, but we don't have no cigarettes. We have no vaping, no this, no that, but like nothing about cigarettes. They're like, how did we forget this? How did this fall through the cracks? So there's no rule. So they're like, well, we can't, suspend the kid or put the kid in detention. We can't because there's no rule. He technically didn't break a rule. And so then they all start talking about, well, who are you to talk to the one young white teacher about how he vapes?
Yeah.
And then he's like, me vape, whatever, Janine smokes weed every night. And she's like, not every night, just most nights.
Well, what they say is she smokes every day, and her correction is every night. This is all in the teacher's lounge or something. And so the whole, like, all of the adults are here, like, starting to engage in this debate where they're all, like, revealing things.
And they all basically are smoking weed, or like the one guy vaping. Or drinking. Like the older kindergarten teacher, she's like, I can't believe you all are drug addicts. And they're like, okay,
she says something,
you have a sippy cup of Pinot Grigio, so I don't want to hear from you. You love those little bottles.
They call her out on the day drinking, but her thing is when Janine is talking about smoking weed, she goes, ganja, the devil's lettuce.
That's
I
right.
thought that was a great line.
And then even like the kind of hunky guy who's from Everybody Hates Chris, he's like, I have a protein power bar that's infused every Sunday. It's the best day of the week,
so they all have
everybody smokes weed, everybody eats weed, everybody has some sort of, or there's somebody who vapes, somebody who drinks, and then the older redhead teacher, she rubs CBD oil on all of her joints.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where we sort of veer away from the cigarette smoking thing. A student in the school has been tape recording them. He's just popped his head in.
You're so old. He's been recording them on his cell phone. phone.
He's recording them on his phone. And so the teachers have lost all credibility.
They go running after him, and he's like, you can ask me not to say anything all you want, but I've already uploaded it to every platform.
Yeah.
And they're like, we've lost all credibility with the students.
Yeah. And so now all of the kids know that all of their teachers have these different relationships with drugs and alcohol.
So you get the quick cut montage of each of them being undermined by their students who like call them out for
the kindergartners asking the teacher, is that Pinot Grigio, Mrs. Howard?
So yeah, there's all of the, and then they're back in the teacher's lounge and they're just like, we've got to do something about this. And that's when they come up with the great idea to have this FADE program come and do a presentation for the kids.
It's like the nuclear option. It's like, there is one other thing. And we should say, like this, what we've just described in the last minute or two is a big chunk between that original debate that they have between themselves in the teacher's lounge and then the subsequent, all the kids calling them out and stuff. Like, you're really getting this message of like the show is trying to show you the
like,
complexity.
Who are we to judge? Like, we can't, we all make our own decisions.
Yeah, the complications of drugs and alcohol, because they also keep saying amongst the teachers, like, we have to tell them that drugs are bad. That's the only message we're allowed to convey.
Exactly.
And so you're getting this like pretty explicit sort of critique of like how the educational system handles
is so
drugs.
Inflexible.
The nuclear option is FADE, which is clearly their fictionalized version of DARE.
Yes. And it is obnoxious as all get out. You have this guy coming out who's like,
this isn't really what DARE was like, was it?
I have no idea.
I don't think so.
I didn't have
I don't
DARE.
think so. I'm pretty sure DARE was real police officers who came into the classrooms. It was not like a bar mitzvah performer type guy coming. This guy has the vibe of Aziz Ansari in Parks and Rec, just like that super over the top, somehow like appropriating every other culture at once and just being like super lame and tacky and
is like trying to rap and tell the kids all the reasons they shouldn't do drugs and shouldn't smoke and whatever. And the kids, like, it's great. You can see the camera work. They are they're having to take these really close-up shots on the small groups of kids that are able to sit there looking bored while this guy is doing this most obnoxious thing up on their little auditorium stage, because and you can see on the corners of shots and things, the little kid actors or extras snickering because it is ridiculous what this guy is doing.
But they get great reaction shots. Yes. There's one point where like a 7-year-old kid just grimaces at something he says that is really good.
And then there's another one where they've got like one of the older kids just falling asleep in the back row. I mean, they're doing a really way to go, camera crew, because I know you had to work hard on that day. So he finishes this like cringe fest of a opening act finishes.
One of his things is, what's poppin' to all my little sweeties? Smoking cigarettes could give you diabetes. Right. Just to give you an example.
Which
of his
isn't
thing.
true, but okay. And so then he finishes and he introduces this other woman who comes out and she's very serious.
Now this is Aparna Nancherla, who's she's a comedian I'm familiar with. She's a stand-up that pops up in all kinds of things. And her whole thing is being very much the opposite energy of this guy. Yes. Super deadpan, meek, meager, just very small, understated presence.
Exactly. And this kind of ends up taking a turn in the similar fashion. Remember that Community episode? They are doing an anti-drug play, and by the end of the play, they've basically convinced everybody to do drugs, even though that wasn't what was supposed to happen. And the kids start asking questions, and they can't get out of it. That's exactly what happens here.
The indiscriminately anti-drug message does not hold up to scrutiny.
Exactly.
That is what the show is saying. And all the kids are asking questions. Well, first of all, it starts off, and this is another thing that happens multiple times, with Caroline, that's Aparna Nancherla's character, going, look to your left and then look to your right.
That's right.
That cliche of public speaking.
And we had that in the Smokers Anonymous part of the King of the Hill as well.
Doing that. And then she goes, But now imagine it's a little bit blurry. That's what it's going to be like on drugs.
That's what it's going to be like on drugs. You won't be able to see them. They'll be fuzzy.
Yeah, and so the kids start asking her, what about my mom's prescription, of cannabis for her glaucoma,
Yes.
all these other things.
What about my mom? She likes to have a glass of wine when she comes home. Well, that's okay. Well, what about, my dad? He likes, he takes whatever, like Valtrex. And she's like, your dad has herpes. And they're like, the teachers are like, oh my God, oh God.
They go like, what's the least bad drug? And she's like, I don't know, cigarettes.
And they're like, no.
Yeah. So in a sense, she's just as unhelpful as the first guy. Slimothy, I think, was his name.
That's right. He's like, my mom called me Timothy, but I call me Slimothy. And so then he comes out to do like the finale in a puff of smoke because he's been backstage blazing. And he comes out, and at this point, the kids are like, so you're saying if I was going to do any drug in the world just because I was curious, the best one and the safest one is cigarettes? And the teachers are like, shut it down. That's it. Nope.
Yeah.
And they all then again, kids are all back in class. They're all back in the teacher's lounge. And they're like, oh man, what have we done? And they're like, well, the district, we found the rule from the district, and the district says 0 tolerance. We have to suspend this kid. And they were like, did anybody even talk to the kid? Like, he doesn't seem like he's a smoker at all. And he seemed really upset with what was happening. So like, why don't we just talk to him? He's not a bad kid, and find out what was going on.
It's definitely not a long walk to say this is maybe commenting a little bit on the criminal justice system and the whole thing that's been in the news for decades now.
Yeah.
The messed up way that black men end up in prison for drugs and stuff. 'Cause this is a black kid that they're talking to.
And also just those 0 tolerance policies. I think it's 100% commenting on that, which as a person in education, I've dealt with for years. Like, people, humans, it's not a 0-sum game. Everything has nuance, and these 0 tolerance policies don't allow for nuance. I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast before, but there was a kid when I worked in television. There was a kid in high school, and I lived in an area where a lot of people went hunting, and the 0 tolerance policy for guns in school extends to students' vehicles in the parking lot. And he had gone hunting over the weekend and had his gun rack on the back of his car. And he didn't have his guns on the gun rack, but apparently one of them or two of them were still in the back seat of his truck. And he realized first period that he forgot this and told his teacher, I've got to go. I've got to take my truck home. I left my hunting equipment in the car. And that teacher had to report it. And that student had to be fucking expelled.
Yeah.
This is like an honor student. And it had to get appealed all the way up to like the State Department of Education so that kid could finish high school. That is bananas to me. Like, it was an accident and he was trying to fix the mistake. But the 0 tolerance policy meant he had to be expelled. And that's the kind of thing that they're talking about
yes,
here.
Exactly.
There's no nuance, even though they know this kid isn't really a ne'er-do-well. Like, he wasn't trying to do anything wrong. He was legitimately curious, and there was no rule.
Yes, there's no nuance, so it goes against their common sense. And they sit down with the kid, and he explains, like, yeah, I was curious. I don't know, there's this weirdo that sells loose cigarettes for $1, so I bought a cigarette. Like, what do you want?
The principal's like, the markup.
Yeah, he goes, gotta talk about inflation. But and so it's exactly that. Like, they ultimately they have to expel him, or not expel, suspend him.
They said they had to suspend him, but then that was once they sat down with him and had the conversation. Greg, what's his name? He is like, we get a little extemporaneous, voiceover at the end where he's like, I happen to know somebody in the district office who was able to pull a few strings. And that's Janine, because she now works at the district office. So she was able to explain the nuance of the circumstance. So they didn't have to follow the zero tolerance policy this time and suspend him. Maybe they were going to deal with it in-house in some way, but they didn't talk about that. They just said they were able to get around the policy this time.
Yeah. So unsurprisingly, this is the least tropey of all of them. We don't get any peer pressure. We don't get any of the usual stuff of trying to spray pine sol.
Nobody's trying to smoke.
Yeah, exactly. At this point in 2024, that's not even something that most kids are interested in.
Right.
So
if they do any of this, they vape. Vaping is a definite issue. There's a lot of peer pressure to vape. That is one of the things of the various teachers with their little subplots in the montage. One of them is a vapor. Right. And that's one of their vices. By the end, they try to convince him to quit. He dives into the trash can after it. And then the very last button is that he's bought a new type of vape pen that isn't like nicotine vape or any type of chemical vape. It's just an oxygen vape. It's called Breathe. Yeah. And he's like, and they're, again, the principal's making fun, like, man, that's a great idea. I should have had that idea. There's all these suckers, and he's like, I wasn't taken for a ride. It was $200 and has a lifetime warranty. I think I was taken for a ride. Yeah. But then he sucks it in and he's like, that oxygen is a great hit. I kind of wanted something like this when I was a cigarette smoker, just like some sort of placebo cigarette or something. Something to put your mouth on for that oral fixation. But yeah, again, we get the acknowledgement that kids getting caught smoking in school is still a thing. That's it's still a fun thing. It's a rite of passage. Yeah, it's like a thing that can happen in a show about a school. Right. But yeah, they have to address it in a whole new way. And yeah, I think it's really smart the way, again, if you want to see it as reaching towards, talking about the criminal justice system, or just be just being a teacher in a school, you have to face these sort of misguided rules and stuff. They did something with it, So what do we think? Looking back over these, the smoking cigarette sitcom sillies. Which one was our favorite? Jay is not going to be happy with me. I really enjoyed King of the Hill. Yeah. I thought what is the word I'm looking for? It was mise en scène, perhaps? Maybe, yeah. The shape of the episode, to me, the rises and the falls, I thought were really spot on. I loved that whole nostalgia thing. Every now and then, I don't like to smoke. I hate the smell of smoke. I'm so sensitive to it. I screech and pitch a fit if somebody is smoking near me when I'm walking down the sidewalks in New York City. But yet, every now and then, I'm like, oh man, I want to have a cigarette. And I'll get one from a friend or from wherever, and I'll light one up and I'll take one drag and I'll be like, this is disgusting. But it's that nostalgia that brings me back to it. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, that's why, other vices that I've mostly set aside, like alcohol, I'll still indulge in once in a while. Cigarette smoking, I feel like I've had to take a really hardcore stance on, because it is weirdly wily like that, and your mind can somehow romanticize something that is really without pleasure beyond just the satisfying of the addiction. Yeah. My favorite was King of the Hill. I really enjoyed that. Like I said, I loved that part of the episode. I loved the whole, them tweaking out, trying to make it through those, first few days of kicking the habit again. I thought it was really well done. I enjoyed it. I haven't watched King of the Hill in years. Yeah, definitely that one. The story arc, like you said, is very clever. It moves beyond the lame PSA mode that the earlier ones were in a fun way. And it gives the wife and the whole family that sort of crazy scenario to go through. It's one of those shows that it's not super fantastical. You probably could make a King of the Hill that's live action. Oh, 100. But yeah. Those ideas, the montage of them and their romantical cigarette things like that, those are the ways that the animated shows do have that breathing room, no pun intended, to, be silly like that. 3 puns not intended on this episode. To be silly and over the top like that in a way that might or might not work as well with
live action. So yeah, that one was really good. I think pure sort of like fun wise, I think Diff'rent Strokes is kind of the high point to me for the reasons that I just kept saying. Like, I think
you like the 70-year-old man in the 20-year-old body, actually like 8-year-old body.
This trope being so sort of like in the pocket sitcom-y with like, oh, the peer pressure. Oh, I need to put on airs and convince the older boys at school that I'm cool and all. Like, it's just such a perfect, stage for little Gary Coleman and those writers to give him those funny lines. And yeah, like this is, even though it's already season 6 and you would think maybe they wouldn't be at its best, this is like prime Diff'rent Strokes for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, these were all good. The Abbott Elementary one, again, like really high level writing to sort of take that trope, be funny, of course, give every single character their own sort of take on it, and then come away with the sort of coherent like message for people watching it.
Abbott Elementary, the thing that kept me, I said this the first time we watched it, the thing that kept me from watching this show was that it felt an awful lot like coming home and going back to work.
Yeah.
Because I work in schools, and so I just was kind of like, I've always been hesitant to watch it, and after we watched that first one, I was like, this show's great. I definitely want to watch more of these. I don't feel this way. This episode is the opposite. This made me feel all those feelings like I was back at school having to deal with these sort of intractable issues of, right and wrong and children and rules and all of these things, and like pressures from the parents and the community and the district office, all that stuff. I was like, I don't like it.
Yeah. No, it's not going to provide the same escape as Leave It to Beaver.
Nope.
What are you going to do? All right. So much for getting caught smoking. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, get out my walker, because I'm aging over the summer holidays.
We're going to be talking about rapidly aging children, and we're going to watch Family Ties, Season 5, Episode 1, Be True to Your Preschool. Growing Pains, Season 6, Episode 13, The World According to Chrissy. Step by Step, Season 6, Episode 19, The Facts of Life. And Modern Family, Season 3, Episode 13, Little Bo Bleep.
Yeah, so just to be crystal clear, it's not episodes where they turn into little old ladies and talk like that.
Oh, it's when they age over the summer break. Yeah. We got infants to 5-year-olds.
We're talking about when your baby that was just born turns into a 5-year-old kid. That's next week. And until then, we will consider this segment of the sitcom study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.